Barrett talking. Today's date is March 26, 1986. I'm interviewing Captain Tom Buttion in Eastern Airlines headquarters in Miami. That name is spelled B-U-T-T-I-O-N. If you would, could you tell just a little bit about what you did before you came with Eastern?
Okay, Jerry. You know, I think like a lot of the fellows with my age bracket and the seniority with Eastern, we were World War II pilots with the U.S. Air Force, at least I was. And I came out of that, and like a lot of the pilots at that time, there were many of us around, so I happened to go with what they called an intrastate airline in Baltimore, Maryland, and that went defunct early in its life, and so I instructed for approximately a year thereafter. And then I became a corporate pilot with the S.C. Russell Company of Cleveland, Ohio. And it happened that the owner lived on the eastern shore of Maryland, and he came through Baltimore a lot and then went on over to the eastern shore in a smaller airplane, and I met the pilot and I met him, and I eventually, when they needed a pilot, I was hired by them. I was very, very young, obviously, at that time. I was age 20 when I got out of the Air Force.
Oh.
And I was 21 a month later. So I was flying a corporate airplane at 22 years of age, and which was very, very young, because at that time, if there were 100 of us across the country, because corporate flying was in its infancy at that time, and I stayed with them for a little over a year, and TWA sent me a telegram and asked me to be interviewed, and I went to get interviewed with them, and subsequently I went with TWA, and this is in 1948. And the early part of 49, I was furloughed after about 15 months with TWA, and then I came with Eastern in June of 1949, and I've been with Eastern June of 49 till January 1 of 1986. Some 36 and a half years, I expect. So that pretty much brings you up to date of where I sit today, but there are a lot of things with Eastern in between, obviously.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Well, can you talk a little bit about that? You started flying with them?
Yeah, I started as a line pilot with Eastern, and as I said, in June of 1949, and my initial base assignment was New Orleans, and I flew out of there for a period of time, and then moved to Miami later in that year, that same year, 1949, and stayed here till stayed in Miami till May of 1950. And there was a reduction in force here, and so the company moved me to New York. And then I stayed in New York from May of 50 to July of 58, and I moved to Washington in July of 58. And during that period of time in New York, I obviously flew as a first officer, and then in May of 1956, I was promoted to captain. In 1956, and then later on that year we merged with Colonial, and they took a group of Eastern captains and retrained us in a DC-3, and I flew the Colonial DC-3 routes for a year, 56, 57, and then, as I said, in July of 58 I moved to Washington as a line captain on a Martin 404, and then after that, in latter part of 59, around October of 59, Washington had grown, and they needed a check airman in addition to the chief pilot in Washington. And I was asked, and I became a check airman. They called him a manager operations then. in Washington from October of '59, and then in July of '61, the incumbent chief pilot moved back to New York to fly larger equipment because the jet had come on the scene. And so he went back to New York to fly the 4-engine jets, and then I became the chief pilot in Washington in July of '61. And then I stayed in Washington at least on paper till January of 1973, and I moved to Miami. But during those years of 1963 through '72, I spent a lot of time in Miami. In '63, I came down here for 3 or 4 months, and I worked in the vice president's office, assisting the director of operations, flying operations, and the vice president of flight operations. And then I returned to Washington after about 4 months. This is March, April, May, June of '63. And then periodically I would come to Miami and work in contractual matters, particular sections as they related to the pilot agreement, in addition to my job as a chief pilot in Washington, and also doing check airman duties even in Washington during that period of time. And then in July of '65, Eastern went into a new type of agreement with its pilots and changed the method of training and introduced what they called a category system, whereas before a captain may be trained in 2 or 3 types of equipment. The category system now restricted him to 1 type of equipment. It was a major change in the way the flight operations operated that portion of the company, and for a period of a year it really wasn't well received because it restricted the pilots, took flexibility away from them as to moving around between equipment, plus being able to exercise their seniority more effectively, at least they thought. So it was a rather turbulent period. And but anyway, I came down here in July of '65, and to implement the agreement that was signed by Bill Whatley and Mike Finello, signed and negotiated by Bill Whatley and Mike Finello. And as I say, it was a very turbulent period of time because we had to introduce this whole new system. We had to train and retrain people. We were also into an expansion time with adding DC-9 equipment and other airplanes to the system. So it was a very, very trying period. Plus the feeling that a lot of pilots felt that we had taken away their flexibilities and the use of their seniority, and we were in a little bit of a constant battle. In fact, in June of '66, we had gotten to the point where we couldn't fly the airline with the training that was required and with the then people that we were trying to include on the seniority list, and we had to exercise a provision of the agreement that that was not well received. In fact, a major grievance was filed by the pilots, and they subsequently lost that. Again, it was one of those times that even Mike Finello at that time, who was director of the manpower planning and flight agreements, was reluctant to institute that portion of the agreement because of the ill feeling about it. There had been a lot of discussions concerning that area, and the pilots, were dead set against using that particular part of the agreement. They felt that it was supposed not to have been there, they're supposed to have been negotiated out, but it still appeared in the words. And so the end result is we did implement that section and allowed us to finish the month of June of '66, and we had an immediate grievance hearing, and the neutral agreed with the company on what they did, and then of course we went on, but it still left the scar tissue of those feelings. So then after that, after June of '66, I went back to Washington. My next long stint down here was in '68, and John O'Neill was the then Vice President Flight Operations, and he went off to Columbia University for 4 months, and I was acting Vice President Flight Operations down here in Miami for the last quarter of 1968. Then after that, the next long stint down here, I was named to the company pilot negotiating committee in December of '69, and that was a very long, drawn negotiation. We really didn't end that up until March of '71. In fact, that's where Colonel Borman came on board in 1970, and one of his first requirements in the end of 1970 was to try to get an agreement with the pilots, so that we at that time had 747s leased to begin flying in the winter period of '70-71. And they came on board in December, and we had no agreement to fly those, and effectively they were parked. And we got that out of the way. Colonel Borman actually played a major role in that particular area. And the final document was signed in '71, but we had already instituted the 747 side because we had made progress in this total negotiation. But it was again a long, drawn-out negotiation that didn't foster good relations, good labor relations, because of being long and drawn out. And so it was a very difficult period. I probably skipped over one other period that I wasn't totally involved in, but may be significant, and that was in '68. There was another labor situation where the agreement after the July '65 agreement, and everybody, the pilot side was not happy with what they had done and what they feel that they had agreed to, or felt that they had agreed to. There was another negotiation, '67, '68, and the pilots instituted a slowdown during that period of time. And it was a significant happening as far as the labor relations area on Eastern. And again, it was another one of these things that built up the long-standing feeling of less than good labor relations within Eastern Airlines. And really the reason I mentioned that, just to get the sequential part of the thing in there. So I think that was significant. And then the 14 months of negotiation that followed in '69, '70, and '71. And then, I said, Colonel Borman come on the scene in that period of time. Then after that '71 agreement, I again returned to Washington, and of course I was involved in a lot of things that were going on down here and making constant trips back and forth. And then in July of '72, Colonel Borman called me and wanted to know if I wanted to chair the negotiations, the pilot negotiations for the company. And he had asked me to come talk to labor relations down here. John Meade was the then vice president of labor relations. And So after discussion with him, I agreed to go ahead and be the chairman of the negotiations during that period of time, and that began in July of '72, and we completed that negotiation December the 27th of 1972, and we beat the amendable date by about 4 days, and it was the first agreement in many, many years that we consummated prior to the amendable date.
Mm-hmm.
And so with that, I was asked to stay in Miami, which I agreed to do, and effective January 1 of '73, I came to Miami on a permanent basis as the Director of Labor Relations and Manpower Planning Flight Operations.
Okay.
On that basis. So do you want me to go on historically?
Yeah, you held that job since.
Well, I held that job till the end of 1973, and then I went to Special Assistant to Colonel Borman January of '74, and then I did varied things for him, still in the labor field, basically with the pilots. And then in July of 1974, I was named Vice President of Flight Standards and Training Flight Operations. And my function there was to day-to-day operation of Eastern's pilots and its airplanes as it related to flight. I was in charge of the standards of operation and the methodology of operation, the training of Eastern's pilots and checking of Eastern's pilots, and just to see that that we maintained a good operation, and just as a way of putting that into time perspective, in years of '72, '73, Eastern had quite a record of incidents. And in fact, you may remember the crash of 212 in Charlotte in September of 1974, that would be. And but it was just a kind of culmination of a long series of incidents that we had of running off the runway, of clipping a tree in the Toledo, of clipping a telephone pole in the Charlotte, and it was something that you don't really want to look back on. But anyway, my primary purpose was clean up the act there and to standardize as much as possible all our operating manuals, all our aircraft manuals, and standardize our training, and above all was to improve our safety of operation. And you know, I'm happy to say that we did quite well. We didn't do totally well because we did get involved in Flight 66 at Kennedy. But that really didn't come down to a crew error problem. It really came down to a phenomena that Eastern had done, that did a lot of study with Dr. Fujita from the University of Chicago on weather phenomena, and that's what you hear today so much about, wind shear and its problems, you know, downburst and wind shear and so forth. And you know, we weren't the only aircraft affected. We happened to be the one that was affected the worst, obviously, that we crashed up there at Kennedy. But the guy in the DC-8 immediately in front of us had tried to tell the tower that nobody should be making approach in that area. He just experienced the worst thing he'd ever done in his life, trying to get his airplane on the ground. And we subsequently came behind him and hit into the approach light stanchions because of the severe wind shear that we had. And it was all documented by Dr. Fujita of the problems that occurred. But basically, you know, that was our real last major problem we had, and and we did clean up their act, and we've had a hell of a good we had a hell of a good safety record through the next period of time from about 75 through 1984. Then we had the one down in Bolivia in the first day of January of 1985. Okay. But the purpose that I went in there for, and that I was charged with by Colonel Borman, was to clean up that and standardize and improve our safety, in which I think we did on a commendable job with Eastern. Just by way of comment, we do operate the largest number of takeoffs and landings per day. We have done that. If you measured airlines by takeoffs and landings, in other words, movements, then you'd find Eastern is at the largest. We've consistently done over 1,500 flight departures a day, and with corresponding landings, and that puts us well above United, American, and all those other people who run longer stage lengths. And we're still above Delta, because Delta has less airplanes than we, although they're short haul like we are. But we exceed them by maybe 150 to 200 movements a day as far as that. And that's your vulnerability to problems at the takeoff and landing function, you know. Yeah. So anyway, that was done. And then in November of the 1975, I moved to Vice President of Flight Operations. And basically that was in charge of all flight operations, whereas before I had the training and the standards and the hiring. This other thing was the oversee of everything as far as flight op was concerned, including all the administration, financial control, fuel management, and things like that. Then in January 1 of 1977, I was named the Senior Vice President of Flight Operations. And incidentally, that was the first, I was the first Senior Vice President of Flight Operations. We had never named a Senior Vice President of Flight Operations before that time. And today there is not a Senior Vice President of Flight Operations. Current fellow is a Vice President of Flight Operations, Bob Shipner. So there was still, and really what most of the guys looked at it was that, you know, that flight had come of age as far as the corporation was concerned, and that we were a major entity.
You're saying the pilots felt that way?
Yes. So then, January 177, I was that, was Senior Vice President of Flight Operations, and then also at that point in time, or very close to that, immediately thereafter, Mike Finello, who was a Vice President of System Operating Center, then reported to me, and then I picked up all the System Operating Center, which is the daily operation of the whole airline. On an ongoing minute-by-minute basis by the nerve center down here. So I had all the flight and I had all the system. And with those people, all the dispatch, the weather, and the customer planners and things like that all reported through the center. So I was that for the subsequent period through October of '83, November of '83. And then Colonel Borman appointed me to Senior Vice President of Operations. And at that point in time, I was then had maintenance, engineering, and flight operations responsibility. And I continued in that position through August of '84. And then I was named Vice President of Airline Operations. And basically what the difference between the two was Colonel Borman had maintenance back to report directly to him as they did the flight, but he wanted me to operate the airline so that he had only one person to call, and that if he wanted to know anything about the airline, he could do that. And I reported directly to him not on a staff relationship as you'd normally see an organizational chart, but obviously up here directly to him as his personal representative of the airline. And so I did that through May of 1985, and then came the reorganization of the airline and the naming of an executive vice president, and in which Joe Leonard was then named then, and then I retired from active participation in the company July 1 of '85, officially retired January 1, 1986. One day. But during that period of time, there's several significant things that give me an insight into the engineering and maintenance, because in July of '84, the incumbent vice president of engineering and maintenance, called Operations Services, became very ill. And so then I ran in addition to my other duties, I ran the engineering maintenance side from July of '84 through the end of April. Now let me correct that, from July of '83 to the end of April of 1984. And then Joe Leonard came on board in April of 1984, and then he obviously then took over day-to-day operation of maintenance. But I had the dual responsibility for about 6 to 8 months of doing my own plus that down there. And of course, if you remember in some of the conversations with the other guys, is the '83 period was very difficult with engineering maintenance because of the labor problems that they were having, and we had acute slowdowns, and we had very difficult time in maintaining parts and availability of parts and things like that. And we frankly weathered the storm of the last half of '83 and the first part of '84 right in the midst of this major upheaval. And if you remember, October of '83 is where the company had indicated that if the IAM didn't come on board, then we would have to look at bankruptcy, and that led into Bill Russery coming on board at the end of '83, and then the agreements in 1984 for the pay cuts. So I was very much involved with the maintenance group at that point in time, and trying to really was to keep the damn airline operating at that point in time. That gives you a rough summary of the time frames of some turbulent years.
What does the chief pilot do?
Chief pilot, it's really the vice president of flight operations is what he is. The chief pilot's a title you may want to bestow upon yourself or not. It may mean more on an ego trip than it means in actuality, but by law it says that the FAR say that you have to have a person designated as chief pilot on a 121 operation, and by putting that title to him, then he's the legal figurehead of the airline operation as far as the flight part is concerned. And I didn't see any reason that, because the law says that you have to have a pilot with pilot licenses in a management capacity. Where that directs the operation of the airline, who is responsible for that. And I didn't have chief pilot in mind because I used then Captain Brady, who was vice president of flying operations, or myself. By law, either one of us met the criteria, because both of us were active pilots. So it didn't make any difference. The name is figurehead only, and it's not necessary. If you want to use it, you can use it, but it's not required.
During all the time you've been in the with Eastern, after you became a captain, have you maintained your flying eligibility or whatever?
Oh yeah, my last trip on the airline was I delivered one of the 757s in December of 1984, and I retired age 60 from the pilot ranks in January 15th, 1985. So less than 1 month prior to my pilot retirement, I was flying airplanes. I incidentally, 757, I was very much involved in the purchase of the A300. I went to Toulouse, France, and we flew the airplane back in May of '77. And but an airplane that I was more involved than any was the 757 right from its inception. And I spent a lot of time at the Boeing Company plant in Seattle, meeting with them, talking with them of trying to direct the airplane at least the way Eastern thought it ought to be, along with engineering and maintenance, obviously. But then I also took flight training on a 757, and I'm the first. I hold the. Maybe it's a distinction, maybe it isn't, but I hold the first air carrier pilot license on the 757. In other words, I was the first airline captain designated on the 757, because with your license, your pilot license, you have an airline transport rating, but then you must have the type aircraft on there that allows you to fly that particular airplane in 121 operation. And I got my license updated with the 757. I was the first guy the FAA had given the rating to. Mm-hmm. And so we had a little ceremony out of Boeing on that. But then I took delivery of the first 757 in December of '82, brought it to Miami, and then we began proving run operations. Proving run operations says for every new aircraft that's not on the certificate and is not currently operating within the continental United States, says you have to do proving runs, and it says you have to operate it around your system on a regular basis to show that you can handle the airplane and that the airplane fits in with your methodology of operation. And so I did that in the end of December of '82. In fact, we started on Christmas Day, and we wanted to have all the hours done by the last day of December, before purposes of tax and so forth. And we operated that airplane in extra section service on December 31 of 1982. So we finished a day or so early. But we started Christmas Day, and we flew every day in order to get the 50-some hours that we got as far as proving run was required. So I did do that, and yes, I maintained that license right through that.
Does Eastern have more variety of planes than most airlines?
Well, we have a large variety of airplanes, and without, don't hold my feet to the fire, but we probably do have more variety. We certainly have more variety of 727s than almost anybody. I think we have 11 different varieties of the 727, and it doesn't make a lot of difference as far as, certainly it doesn't make any difference as far as a passenger, because each airplane comes up and is upgraded of things that go along. Engineering improves this and they add this, but it puts it a different designation. Okay. And we have lightweight airplanes, heavyweight airplanes. We have stretch 727s with what we call a small engine on, and we have stretch 727s with large, and we have variations all the way up through in all these 727s. And yes, probably overall we have more variety of aircraft than probably any other major carrier.
I was just wondering about that, because it would provide an additional problem for safety, training, and make maybe your labor agreement with the pilots more complicated.
Well, yes. You know, anytime you have a variation of an airplane, it's another type within the contract, and it's another stepping stone that the pilots can go through. Not 727. 727 is it all the way through.
No.
But when you go DC-9, 727, you know, A300, 1011, DC-10, 757, they are all types, all category types as you go through, and a guy may go through progression and go right up through each one of those things. That means you have to train each time he goes through there, and it does add to the training load. And in fact, it's a little bit of a dichotomy, because that in the 60s everybody's aim was to fleet simplification, and we heard that numerous times, and then we end up with more damn airplanes, different types than we know what to do with. And each one is an airline for the flight operations side. It's an airline within an airline, because as a category system, you have a group of pilots fly only 727s. You have a group of pilots fly only DC-9s, and then so forth and so on. And each one has to be treated individually as to what your capability is in that. And normally you don't have the ability to mix and match flight crews. So on an operating problem, we can have a lot of 1011 pilots at the end of the month, and we're short as hell on a 727. And yes, it does create operating problems with that number of aircraft.
Is it, when you look back on it, was it a mistake then to put pilots into categories, or wasn't there any choice about that?
Oh, I think there was a choice. In fact, back in '65 and the '66 period, I think that there was a definite choice in which could have been made to alleviate part of that problem. Jerry, yes, we had a problem prior to '65, because with the advent of the DC-8, the 720, and the 727, because there was no restriction to bidding, pilots would bid all the equipment. They have all the types in their pocket, so that when the month came, they would look and say, well, I want to fly here instead of flying there, or the flights on the 720 don't look good, the pairings don't look good, and they look good over here, working condition-wise, I'll fly over here. So we would end up doing all the training that was required to fly the airline, but when we came to the month to fly it, we wouldn't have the people. Because some group of guys would exercise their seniority and go over to another type, and you never seem to be able to match. But you know, it was a hell of a lot easier way to go that, and this of course is money more than quarterbacking, but it's not anything I didn't say then and I say now, is that all we had to do was restrict them from downbidding. If they took a DC-8 and accept DC-8 training, they couldn't go to 720, 727. You know, that would have alleviated, rather than the category system. I always describe the category system as putting your feet in concrete and letting it dry.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah, yeah.
And once you were there, you're locked there.
Yeah.
And
that's bad for the individual pilot as well as for the flexibility of the airline.
Right.
Yeah.
And you know, I told Mike Finello and Bill Watley many a time is that you never left any escape valve. You never left any way to get out of the problems that you would create. Well, they were enamored. United had gone to this system, and they were enamored by United. And I guess they thought it was something that was already in place that they could just take and go boom. But you know, if you compared the then United documents with the Eastern documents, you saw that United had a hell of a lot of escape valves in theirs. They could delay a guy for 180 days. They could train him and say, hey, we're not going to let you go in there for I can hold you off for 180 days. What gives you the ability to reshuffle?
Yeah.
And that's just one of many, many things that frankly was left out of the document. And it was a very trying period during that period. For that year, it was a very, very difficult year.
Was it a good idea to get the Airbus and the 757?
Well, I think both those airplanes are fine machines. You know, the A300, obviously, at the time, certainly wide bodies, we had enough wide bodies at that point. We had 1011s, about 34, 35, 36, somewhere in that area. And I think at the time we had more wide bodies than we knew what to do with even. The A300 came along, and with the purchase deal based on the use you made of the airplane, in other words, the load factor that you ran, it didn't make any difference as far as the passengers, because you were getting you were getting compensated in a different way by the purchase price of the airplane.
Oh, okay.
You see, and so that was a hell of a good deal as far as that was concerned. So we did well on that. The Airbus is turned out to be a very fine machine, and you know, we run that moonlight service to Houston with it, and it has one of the best cargo carrying capabilities of any wide body. You know, absent the 747, but 747 is just too expensive domestically, really. You just have to put too many people in there at one time. But it's done very well. It has GE engines on it. The CF6-50 engine has been an outstanding engine for us. Operating wise, it has a hell of a good operating record. As far as reliability is concerned, and as I said, the price was right on the damn thing. 757 was an airplane that really began initially just as an upgraded 727, and then it developed into a whole new airplane, much at the insistence of really Colonel Borman.
Oh, really? Oh.
And Boeing, I think, saw the light that they really needed an airplane, rather than jack up the fuselage of a 727, put new wings under it, that they really needed a whole new airplane. And as they progressed through, I think, frankly, that they too could see that they would be a whole lot better off to build a new airplane rather than a derivative airplane. And so the 757 evolved into a very, very fine machine. It had the benefit of the 767 being about 6 months ahead of it, because all the engineering work that was done in the 767 gravitated to the 75, and being about 6 months later, it had the 757 enjoyed the ability to fine-tune that engineering data to be incorporated in the 7.5. And you know, the glass cockpit entered the 7.5 before it entered the 7.6, because you know, we were shooting toward two-man crew on that airplane, and everything that we did was directed toward simplification of the machine. And we were able to do that along with the insistence of British Airways. I think British Airways also played an important role, along with Eastern and Boeing, in the development of 757. And today, I think it's probably one of the finest and most advanced air machines flying. It has extreme capability as to range, as to payload, and economics of operation. Fuel-wise, the goddamn thing uses about the same fuel as the DC-9, and you know, DC-9 carries less than 100 people, and it carries 185 people.
That's
so
quite startling.
It's a hell of a start. Seat mile costs really are way to hell down comparatively. It's probably the lowest seat mile cost airplane running on a major carrier today. You know, I can't talk about the BAC 146 and stuff that PSA has or things like that, but I'm talking about on the Delta American United Eastern concept. It's well, it's enough that Delta bought them. Northwest bought them, so it's got to speak for itself. Yeah. But it's a fine air machine. You got a time problem, huh?
No, I'm just looking at it because okay. I want to cut off at 3. I want to flip the thing over at 3:30.
All right.
Let's take a break. Let's take a break now. I'm going to flip this over. Okay, we're back on. You were talking about an earlier period when there was some of the beginnings of some of the strife on the airline back in the late 50s. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, Jerry, you know, I think it's probably significant, particularly in the light that we are talking about some of the labor strife on Eastern Airlines and maybe how we got to where we seem to be today. I'd probably, I think, significant, at least in my mind, was the 1958 when the strife began with the Flight Engineers International Association, called the FEIA, and at that time there was ongoing bitterness between the pilots and the flight engineer as the jurisdiction in the cockpit and who had jurisdiction of the airplane prior to departure from a gate. And being a pilot and having listened to Alpa a lot, in fact, in '58 I was the vice chairman of the local council in Washington as an airline pilot. The pilots were very adamant that you know, the flight engineer was a crew member, and that the FARs state very clearly that the captain is command of all flight personnel while they're on duty. And so, you know, it was not in question in the pilots' minds that the captain was in complete command and control, and they weren't about to relinquish any of that command or control to an engineer prior to departure time as to ruling on the adequacy of the airplane as to items or whatever. And so in November '58, the flight engineers went on strike on Eastern in relation to that item plus contractual items. And that strike lasted November, December, and into January of 1959. And they then returned to work, obviously, without any proviso of command, and so things went about their way, and certainly, you know, again, there wasn't complete harmony among the flight crew members as a result of that. And in fact, I think some of the FEI people took pictures in the cockpit with the flight crew unknowing about it, and some showed that maybe they had their eyes closed or something like that, and they proceeded to show those around, trying to defamate the integrity of the flight crew and the captain in particular. And then this culminated by the pilots taking position that that job was going to be their job, and so they got the company to agree to put a fourth pilot in our DC-8s, in our four-engine jets, really. And in that position, the fourth pilot was an Alpa pilot, and he sat on the jump seat behind the captain, really with no official duties other than to register communications and departure times and things of that nature, company communications. The FAA, in their stated responsibility and in their manuals state that they're to have a seat in the cockpit behind the captain's seat in which they can view all the flight crew members and the coordination thereof, and then also the flight instrumentation to see what's happening. Pilots maintain that that seat belonged to the pilots, and that the FAA would have to take what they call the second jump seat in back of the jump seat. And so this led to a confrontation between the pilots, Eastern's pilots, and the FAA, and in June of 1960, there was a partial work stoppage, a walk-off of a substantial number of pilots. for a 1 week period of time.
Okay.
So this led to a walk-off in June of 1960 for approximately a week of the pilots contesting the FAA's right to that seat. They obviously had to give up on that, but that was again a just continuing lack of harmony within the flight crew members' rank between the flight engineer on one hand and the flight operating crew on the other hand, the captain and the pilot. This continued through the period, the turbulent period that I would say turbulent period of 60, 61, and 62, because this is when McIntyre came on board and tried to head the airline in a direction to move it from where we had been in the later 50s when Captain Rickenbacker left and we had a succession of presidents. And in 1962, again, the flight engineer and the pilot thing had festered through this entire period. And in 62, the flight engineers again walked off in contract dispute in the course of negotiations, with the major issue being again who was going to occupy the third seat in the cockpit, whether it was going to be a pilot or whether it was going to be an FAI type. The pilots, of course, were pressing that it be an ALPA person, and the FAI pressing that it was going to be Flight Engineers International person. This strike went on for a long period of time, and in fact, it came very close at that point, at least my memory serves me, that we'd gotten very close to selling off the airline.
Oh, really? Oh.
Yes, at that point.
The airline was shut down during that time.
Oh, we were shut down
yes.
solidly for 3 months.
Okay.
The Fine Singer Commission was implemented, was consummated at that time to hear this dispute. You know, I think the Fine Singer Commission, the record is there for everybody to see and review. Mm-hmm. But what happened with the airline was that we offered the Eastern offered the flight engineers to come back to work under certain conditions, with the understanding that the third member was going to be a pilot in the cockpit. We, of 600 plus flight engineers that we had at that point, 103 flight engineers returned to work. And they're still known to the airline as the returned 103, or the prior rights people, prior rights being to that third seat in the cockpit.
That was part of the deal. They were offered.
That was part of the deal. That whoever came back would be given prior rights to that thing. We also gave all those guys who wanted it flight training. The company picked up the bill for training them as pilots. They gave them right from the beginning, just took them right through all the ground schools and through all the initial private license, the commercial license, got their instrument rating. And they had a certain period to commence that training, and then after that, then they no longer had the right to do that, and most all of those 103 took that training, maybe minus a few. And many of those fellows are flying captain today on Eastern Airlines, because they went from the flight engineer seat to a pilot trained. They got trained in the right seat and flew the equipment, got the experience over many years, and then moved up to captain.
So from that point on, everybody in the cabin was
in the cockpit.
in the cockpit was ALPA.
Was ALPA.
jurisdiction.
That's right. That's right. They were put on the Eastern pilot seniority list, and they maintain a block of 103 numbers in there. And they, as I say, they moved up. Once they made the transition over the pilot, they stayed as pilot. They could go back to prior rights if, for some reason, they weren't able to make the transition. So there was always a spot held for them in there. And say, I'm happy to say that most all of them, after long years of experience flying co-pilot, moved into the captain's seat. And they're flying, many of them are flying captain today. A lot of them are retired, obviously, today. But we made that transition there. And again, you know, as I mentioned to you, that damn near broke the company because, just the upheaval, the wage upheaval, I mean the labor upheaval, and then the cost of making that transition. We started up the airline. Really, we started the shuttle first. And we started that out of Washington with Martin's. And in fact, we were the only crew base operating for the first several weeks, and we had operated all the shuttle with that. And then we started up the Constellation operation on the shuttle, and we brought in into Washington engineers, flight engineers, and who had returned. And we had a lot of security problems during that time because, you know, they were still picketing, and so we had to really bring the guy in from the air side into the hangar rather than the street side. And so that led to quite a long period of time of changeover, and in fact we had people flying out of seniority. That's the advent of what is known as the 272 group. The 272 group were pilots who were trained as flight engineers to bring the operation of the airline up to speed. With the 103 we had, the 272 that we trained from the pilot seat over to the engineer seat, and then we brought in the new hire to fill the pilot seat, because the new hire off the street didn't have the qualifications to, without having the flight engineer's license, didn't have the qualifications of required 121 operation. In other words, you had to be an air carrier pilot, you had to have X number of hours and X number of licenses in order to go ahead and take the eligibility to take the written. Then once he got the written passed, then we trained him on the panel. So we took those 272 Eastern pilots who had operated as pilots prior to the strike, moved them into the engineer's seat after the training, after certification and everything, and then hired a new hired pilot into there. So what we had was we had senior pilot in the engineer's seat and junior pilot sitting in the co-pilot seat. And, you know, after a while that didn't sit well, and it took us the better part of a year or more to straighten that mess out. And at much cost, obviously. But again, that's just a turbulent period of time, and it was very, very difficult again, and took a lot of money, a lot of things away, created a lot of animosities between groups, certainly between the IAM and the pilots, because the IAM looked at a flight engineer guy as one of their type people, he being a mechanic, basically, rather than a pilot.
I see.
You see.
Okay.
So there was a lot more camaraderie between the mechanic and the engineer than there was between the mechanic and the pilot, because a lot of the engineers came to the mechanic ranks because their maintenance background. Because basically you could get your engineer's license either through pilot experience or through mechanic experience. These individuals basically were mechanic experience prior to their flight engineer position. So there was closer ties between the mechanics. So that kind of kept the separation between the mechanic and the pilot going. And then in 1966, the IAM struck Eastern. That was part of an aircon deal, though. I think aircon was negotiating for a group of carriers, and Eastern being one, being a member of aircon, the negotiation fell apart and Eastern went on strike. Mm-hmm. I think it's like the UAW picking Ford to strike, and we were picked to strike.
Okay.
You see, and so in 1966 we had a mechanic shutdown. I don't remember the length of time, but it was substantial. You know, more than 2 weeks, probably a month. Mm. That again added to our woes and added to our monetary problems. In the meantime, Mr. Hall had come on board in the end of '63, and then really '64 through '68. And so he, you know, he tried to square away Eastern's labor problems and their employee disharmony to a great degree, and we had some successful years during that period of time, if you remember. And but that was an period of time that fit in prior to the pilot slowdown in '68 that again gave us a headwind to fight. You know, again, our operations slipped. You know, our airplanes were grounded. Our flights were delayed, and again, you know, you get that disharmony between the pilot group and the mechanic because, frankly, the mechanic thought the pilot was being a horse's ass when he refused airplanes, and they'd refuse airplanes like on a DC-9. In the cockpit, you have a little window that you can view whether the nose gear is down or not. And in fact, that window never stays clean because the wheel, if you get on a dirty runway or with slush or wet or whether it kicks up just like your car gets cruddy. And so they would say, well, that's not clean, that has to be clean. And things of that nature, just little nitty things that they could find to slow the airline down, and which it did effectively. In fact, you know, Max Davis, who was a retired pilot, wrote a book for the rest of the airline pilots on how to effectively slow down.
Oh, really?
And that has had some distribution through ALPA. He wrote it for ALPA, the best I know. So it's probably still in existence today somewhere in somebody's archives on how to effectively slow down. And we, I think, at that time, again, we were in a catbird seat when that happened.
The pilots were, you mean?
Yeah, well, yeah, the pilots slowed down. The Eastern was in the catbird seat of the guy being, you know, being slowed down. Oh. We happened to be in the wrong seat at the wrong time.
Okay.
Catbird seat being in the front at the right time at the wrong time, all right?
I got you.
So, anyway. But that pretty much fills in an area of time that I'm sure that you'd be interested in as far as any analyzing Eastern's and Eastern's family problems, if you will.
Family squabbles. Huh?
Family squabbles. They were major family squabbles.
As a member of ALPA, can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I tell you, in ALPA, I joined ALPA initially, like most of the pilots. After a year, you're on year probation, and then after your year of probation is over, then you become an ALPA member, provided you make application, which I did. And so I was an ALPA member from 1950. I initially began some ALPA work in New York when I was a co-pilot in New York. We used to have, as part of the council, we would have what we called crew schedule committee. Crew schedule committee basically looks into the area of how the pilots are scheduled, and effectively we put together a crew schedule manual. We may put it together, we may modify what's there, and it generally comes through conversation and meetings with the company. But I was a member of the crew schedule committee for the New York domicile in 1953, and for that period of time, while the then council chairman was in office, and I think the guy's name was Captain Bauer, I functioned as a member of 3 people on that committee, and I guess I was on that for maybe a year and a half. After that, I didn't do anything with ALPA until I moved to Washington in July of '58. We created a council there, and I became the vice chairman of the council, 142, in Washington, and I functioned in that capacity until I went into management as a check airman, as I'd indicated to you, in October of '59. Although through my entire stay at Eastern, I've retained my membership as ALPA. I was always executive inactive, but it meant still I paid dues. Even as an officer of the company, I paid dues to the ALPA. That's maybe incongruous with what you're thinking, but it was a methodology and madness behind that, because number one, that way I could keep up on what was happening within them. I got their magazines, and I would get some publications. Plus, the pilot, they become a little unique in the way they look at you, and that is that if they feel you're not one of them, there's not a goddamn thing you're going to do that's right. Right?
Okay.
So I stayed as a dues-paying member of the ALPA organization right through January 15th of 1985 for 35 years, 35 and a half years. So, but I could always tell them that, you know, in discharge of my daily duties, that hell, you know, I knew I'm one of you. I know the way you think. I know what this is all about. I've been there before you, and I continue to be there. So I couldn't be pointed at as a desk-bound, know-nothing situation. So it was an effective expense. Sure, it cost me money every year, and it was out of my pocket is what I paid it. And I could have stopped at any time, but I just didn't think it was in the best interest of Eastern or the best interest of me performing in my job to do that. I was more effective, at least in my own mind, on maintaining that position. So,
the fact that you had been a pilot gives you some rapport with them to begin with, I suppose, because you can kind of empathize with them. But if you stay a member of their organization, it's even...
It was an effective tool, Jerry, really, when you look at that, you know, and one of the things, if you want to be persona non grata around here, is not to be a member of the pilot union and be a pilot. You know, they look at you saying, hey, you know, we're improving your goddamn conditions, and you're taking it, you know, you're taking a free ride. And BS on you, you know. So it gets down even into the situation is that if you try to use a non-ALPA instructor down there, they have effective ways of saying, hey, we won't take training from him. By law, they can't do that.
Yeah.
But by the ability, see, the contract has in it that the pilot may request a change of instructor. So they say, hey, the contract says I can change instructors. I want to change of instructors. So, you know.
You can get around it.
That's right.
Yeah.
So you've got to play the little game with them, but it's an effective tool, and it's one that, I say, it was a few bucks, but it, you know, I think it allowed me to do my job.
Are there many pilots with Eastern that do not belong to
the ALPA?
ALPA? Or is it
Well, there's
small?
an agency shop now that was just given to them against my better judgment in, I guess, '82 or thereabout. They implemented the agency shop. which means that you don't have to be a member, but you have to pay those dues associated with representation and negotiation. But there are about 900 that are non-full members. They're agency shop members, so they don't have a vote on that basis.
It's a large number then, really.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, of 40-some hundred pilots, there are about 900. That number really was never that high. We used to run 200 to 300, but then there was a lot of dissension that crept in the alpha ranks just as bad as the dissension that they seem to have with the company. And that number grew from 200 to 300 to 900. That I think about 900 today. Gibson could give you a better run on that number than I can, but it's about that.
The pilots as a union are unique in that they're relatively higher educated, probably more formal education.
That's true.
That's would tend to be relatively better off. Does that prevent some problems with it being a cohesive group and a labor organization, you think?
I don't know, Jerry, to answer your first question and your first surmise is yes, the pilots by profession are highly educated people, both technically and scholastically. But yes, in fact, we had standards that included 4 years of college for a long, long time. I think today, and you'd have to check again today, but I think they've backed off on that. That's because supply and demand, because so many people are hiring that they've backed off. I think now it's 2 years of college, but basically from about 70 on, we required 4 years of college. We probably have every description of degree that you can think of within that pilot workforce. We have dentists. We have a lot of lawyers, a hell of a lot of lawyers. We have a lot of MBAs in there. And we have both in engineering, the sciences, and administration. So it's a very high. It's a group, because of that you cannot obviously talk down to. You have got to recognize that. That's a fallacy. Colonel Borman has played that to the hilt of recognizing their education backgrounds and how he approaches them. He always used to tell them that it was always stimulating to come talk to them, because the level of questions, a lot of guys with CPAs and accounting degrees and as highly educated as any officer that we have in the finance department. And some of their questions were very piercing questions, and it was a little bit of a mental challenge at times to stay up with them. But yes, you have to recognize that, so you have to approach them a little differently. I always took the position, pilots, they're stubborn anyway. By nature, they're stubborn. And that I always took the position I can add to them, but I can't change them. And anything I did, I always tried to add to them rather than change the basic. If I wanted to change a procedure, I always added to the procedure till that procedure got into place, and then we would gradually drop out what we didn't want out of the thing. so that the change came through a matter of evolution and from growing, rather than going in there and say, we're going to change all this. I never used those words. Tried not to use those words. So I just thought it was important. It was important because of the way you had to approach. You can't approach them the way you approach a mechanic. Although the mechanic today, I've also learned from my 8 months over there, is there's a hell of a lot of guys over there with pretty damn good educations. And a lot of them, like I talked to Chuck Connor a little while ago. He is on a CRIC committee, a cost identification committee that I ran the year prior to the time I left here at Colonel Borman's request. Now, he has an MBA, and he's a mechanic. I had several others that I kept the door open to, and that also had MBAs. And I was surprised because I was at one time being pilot, been looking at the pilot side, you know, looked at that education level there and didn't look at that education level of mechanics. But you're going to find there's a hell. I wonder why they're there, but a lot of them use that experience in other situations outside. Is why they do it, and they use this as a ground floor operation, and they do other things, and they look obviously to try to get into the management side. In fact, I talked to Connors a little while ago, like I said, and said, you know, I understood that you were looking at a supervisory position. He says, well, he says, right now the way the things are and the way we're fighting at each other again, he says, Tom, we've gone back the way we were before, and he says, a lot of things they're doing don't make sense, and we're fighting like hell, and he says, I don't even think I want to go into management. But you know, there's a guy sitting there with an MBA. So there are on both sides, probably not to the degree, because as I say, from 70 on, we were 100% four-year degree.
Okay.
Yes, and let's say a lot of MBAs, a lot of lawyers, more lawyers I know what to do with. So anyway,
well, I was think about that from a point of view of a negotiating committee. I imagine that makes it difficult, where you have a lot of people. Everybody knows best, in a sort of sense.
Oh yes.
Both, and did you have some experience on the union
side,
bargaining side, or
negotiations?
Yeah.
No, other than the things that I did, like I said, the crew schedule committee, which is a little bit of a bargaining type situation, because it says, hey, we want to do it this way, and the company wants you to do it this way, and you meet the road in between, you know, and so forth. So I got a little bit early on, and as far as being a vice president vice chairman of the local council, you don't get involved too much, Jerry, in that kind of negotiation, except the bartering that goes on within the MEC, the pilots themselves, the Master Executive Council. Master Executive Council, I don't know if anyone's described it to you, probably Al has or Bob has.
Yes.
There's several members of each council make up the Master Executive Council, you know, and then they have a chairman and so forth. And then they have an elected negotiating committee, but they, you know, you have to know whereof you speak, and obviously you have experience in labor, is that if you're on the company side, you have to justify everything. On their side, they don't have to justify a damn thing. You ask them why they want it because you want it, not because it has any logic or reason behind it. And the big thing that we used to really have to, well, let me backtrack a little bit with you, that as a director, as a chief pilot in the domicile, you had council chairman come every 2 years, you get a new one. And you used to have to go through a complete education process with each of them to you know, what's all the historic way of doing things, what's precedent, what's been through the grievance procedure, and how it operates and so forth, and what interpretations are of the agreement. Too many of them, and then many line pilots, and as you said with the educated line pilot, is how I think it ought to be rather than how time has proven it to be, and the grievance process has proven the interpretation of it. So you have to go through every one of those for the first 6 months. It's a hell of a transition period of learning. And you know, after a while, and like I said, I was in Washington, 61 to 73, you know, it's 12 years, and I've seen a lot of chairmen come through there, and I've had to And every time I said, oh God, I have to go through another 6 months of re-education. So, you know, no sooner you got that guy educated and somebody else came in. And you do the same way in the basic negotiation with the negotiator, because they're not professional negotiators. They're appointed by the MEC, elected by the MEC, and they may come in with no prior negotiating experience except how they think things ought to go. And so you spend one hell of a lot of time sifting through all the chaff to get at the meat of what you have to do, and you know, some of those things just end up more and more as far as time is concerned. Just it's time consuming to go through that thing, and that's you know, negotiations is a challenge. I enjoyed it. It's also frustrating as hell at times too. So, but really, you lived in almost on Eastern at least, because we were always asking some sort of change, at least in the last, since '75, that we always seemed to be negotiating with the pilots, because we wanted to do this, or we wanted to change that, or we wanted to fly additional time, or we wanted this, or we wanted that. So, you know, it just, after you're here as long as I was there, you've negotiated a hell of a lot. You negotiated your sleep, all right? Jesus Christ. So anyway, interesting time. But
can you talk a little bit about the period sort of beginning with in and around deregulation forward, the negotiations over some of these things that, you know, like there was the wage freeze in '76, and then the variable earnings program and stuff like that?
Well, you know, the wage program, the variable earnings, they all came about because of deep problems in '73, '74 as far as finances were concerned, right? And then Colonel Borman took over the presidency of the company in '75, and it was necessary to, in order to keep the thing floating, that we improve our profit situation within Eastern. In fact, I think he would tell you that in January of '75, we needed we had a $75 million loan with the bank that we couldn't pay, nor would they renegotiate. So it led to one of the initial programs of the warrants and profit sharing. And like a lot of the pilots used to laugh, because the pilots had a different field. Most of them all took warrants because they looked as a company that they're married to, and you know, just by thought process, it says, hey, we got to survive, so I'm gonna stay. I'm gonna go to the warrants, and then I'll get stock. A lot of people obviously went profit sharing, and they made out pretty damn good in subsequent years, because we did make some money, enough to pay some profit sharing in those years. But you know, that was brought on by trauma of continuing trauma of lack of profit of Eastern, really, that started at the advent of the '60s. You know, we didn't make any money. We didn't have jet aircraft to any great degree. In the '60s, we had bought some DC-8s and 720s at the end of the '50s and early '60s, and then the 727 came on board in August of '63, and we had to equip with jet aircraft. And we had not made a profit. We had been losing money, and with all the costs of the strife that we had to borrow heavily to buy the equipment. And even though, say, Mr. Hall came on in the end of '63, '64, early '64, and we did make, we had some reasonable years through '68. We then turned tail and went downhill again, right on through, and we were always borrowing more money to buy equipment so that we could expand to increase our cash flow. And so that by 1973, started September 73, I believe, that we again were in very dire straits. And through 74, and then in 75 rolled around, we couldn't pay the loan payment. So we were forced to do something, and so we got into wage programs with the pilots, and I think initially the pilots led the way on these early programs. At least they were probably the first to agree. The non-contract was automatic. You know, you explained it to them, but once somebody else came on board, everybody else, I mean the non-contract would quickly follow suit. And so, you know, that was the beginning of a long series of programs, of profit sharing, of stock, of variable investment program, you know, wage investment program, right on up through the debacle in early '86. But you know, we did fare well in '78 and in '79. I think in '78 the people got half of their money back. Their variable earnings program, they got half their money back. You know, everybody contributed 3.5% of their salary during that period of time, and they got about 50-some%, 53 or 57%. The number escapes me actually. And then in '79, actually the year after deregulation, deregulation came into effect October of '78. But the year after, we still enjoyed, the airline industry enjoyed a hell of a good year, and we made a profit. And the employees got their full VEP plus back in '79. Well, that was the last year of any profit for Eastern. And certainly we may have had some difficulty in the timing of purchase of new aircraft and things like that. With the A300 had come on board, and we'd made orders for the A300. They kept coming, and we bought additional 727s, a substantial number of those. So we had built up one hell of a cost debt. And
let me turn this over.
Yeah.
Okay, we're back on. You were just talking about the.
Well, we were talking about the just after the year of '79 and the advent of deregulation, Gary, and that you know, we had like I said, had a good year in '79. We returned all the VEP to the employees plus a bonus to the employees, but we had ordered back in '78 one prior to deregulation aircraft, A300s and 757s and 727s, and they continued to come on board. And of course, as I say, we built up one hell of a debt as a result of all those aircraft coming. But I think that a couple other things played important in this 80, 81, 82, 83 time frame, and that is that not too many economists predicted the deep recession that the country would go through. Mm-hmm. And in fact, if my memory serves me well, it's many of them, including our own planning department, based on Chase econometrics, stated, you know, we were looking for a 6-month recession and things would pick up and go on. And then that got progressed into 81, and again 81 would be a better year, but when you got to 81, it was the worst year. And then 82 was just a repeat and worse than that. In the meantime, here we're getting all new airplanes. You know, deregulation provided a means, Jerry, to jump all over and to go in wherever. And I think basically Braniff was a prime example of overexpansion and subsequent demise. That you know, because of all the units that we were accumulating, we really had to find a place to put them. And of course, you know, planning with that number of units, we're looking for a hell of a lot of places to go, so we proliferated in opening up a lot of new stations. And each of those stations are substantial in cost, at least in the Eastern's methodology of doing things. And we're a big carrier, we're a recognized carrier, we have to have the facility commensurate with that type of image and so forth. So we put a lot of money into places, Mexico, Guadalajara, that we're now out of, and Puerto Vallarta, and you name a lot of places that we pulled out of, and subsequently. That we're now going back into. Huntsville we pulled out of, we're going back into, and places like that.
It's a high cost, though.
Yes, high cost. High cost both ways. Get out of leases and go in new places, then subsequently go back in. We went into a lot of cities. To my way of thinking, frankly, that couldn't support a level of service to make it profitable. We today operate into places, or continue to operate into places, where we have one flight a day. Austin, Corpus Christi, things of that nature. You know, to my mind and to a lot of employees' minds, questionable of how can you make that a pay. You know, particularly when it's such short segment stuff also. But anyway, back to the deregulation time, it was a matter of two things. It allowed the corporation to expand to a great degree. It found home for airplanes that we're getting, and it also allowed competition to walk in beside you. And of course, you know, our bread and butter has always been the Northeast Corridor and Miami. And we suddenly found ourselves with a substantial amount of competition on our primary runs. And, you know, I imagine yet today how the New York, Florida market was over 20%. Of our total, and I would still imagine it's probably in the teens today. But when you start affecting almost 25% of your market penetration, then and that was pretty high in dollars also, that you've materially affected a corporation. And we, you know, we may have made mistakes then of trying to, when somebody came in north-south, we went east and west. Well, if they're going to come in, we'll get our share, we'll get our dollars from some other place. That may very well have been a mistake early in the game that most every airline has made, major carriers made, and that is to allow a little guy come in and skim the cream until it got so large, then they had to do so about it. And that's where we are today, is with People Express, is they've gotten so large that you can't walk away from them anymore. You know, Air Florida met their demise, but they met their demise from overexpansion. Had they stayed in what they were doing, they probably would have gotten a hell of a lot good financial base and moved on. But Acker wanted to be more than a small town guy, and so he certainly expanded Air Florida into London and so forth. But that's a two-edged sword as far as deregulation. You know, allowed you to do things that possibly you shouldn't have done, and allowed other people to come in and give you trouble. And maybe it would have been better. And again, this is, you know, the Monday morning quarterbacking stuff, is that you should have fought your battle in your own backyard before you you try to go in somebody else's backyard and grab them. And which they, in my book at least, they seem to be doing today. They're taking on, say, we may lose money for a period of time, but we won't let him get any more foothold than he has already, because this is territory that we have to protect. It's a hell of a decision to make that way, because certainly you look at saying, hey, our yield's got to be up, you know, we've got to do this, we've got to do that, but yet, you know, your market share in that Northeast and the Florida markets is a substantial part of Eastern Airlines. Always has been a substantial part. It's always been the bellwether of how well this company does, how well the season operates to a great degree, and it doesn't hold that total today because our July and August revenue is higher than our highest wintertime revenue, and that used to be reversed at Eastern all the time. Our highest revenue was always the winter months, and the lower revenue was the summer months because we were primarily north-south carrier. Yes, we've changed that flow to the West Coast, but we may have done it at the expense of our primary winter traffic also. So, but it's a hard decision. It's at best Monday morning quarterbacking. But the primary thing is it allowed each of them, each side to go. Somebody to go at you, and you to go at somebody else. You to expand some other places, and whether it's and whether it's just a phenomena. But if you look at the carriers that have gotten into trouble, or the carriers that have expanded too much. Now, American and United, you say, well, they're expanding. But if you remember all during the 80, 81, 82 time period, American withdrew. They sat back. You know, not until the things turned around did they begin to move. You didn't see them go into any new cities, basically, in the 80, 81, 82 time frame. They really didn't start until the period of time, the end of 82, when the stock market broke in September, September of 82. And it started to move on, and the economies began to move. And then they have come out great guns. They claim is what that they have a window. They feel that they have a window of expansion while the economy is in a progressive mode, that they can get footholds and get their share without losing money. We expanded in a down period, but in some cases we had no recourse. We needed money. We had the airplanes coming. We had to use them because we needed money. But the whole scenario just got worse and worse, gets tighter and tighter and tighter. And it just constantly led to requests from employees. And it got to the point, well, you know, you ask for this today, what are you going to ask for tomorrow?
When you say requests, you mean reductions or increase in productivity? And
that's correct. Yeah. All was something new. We needed a VP, a WIP, you know, a stock plan, give up 18, 20%, 22%, and then give it back, and then ask for it back again. And it was a constant surge of that since 1975. People just finally got tired of it. You talk to a lot of Eastern employees today, and even the 20%, you know, they've given now through force. But they said, hell, tomorrow they may come in and ask us for another. Who knows? That's the way things have been going. And it's a difficult morale situation. You know, so many people that you met in the halls if you came out here, and particularly being away where you have the opportunity to see them once in a couple of months, stop and talk with them, of how debilitating the whole thing is. And a lot of good people left. A lot of good people left. You know, and I don't know this to be a fact, but I was in a conversation on the telephone with somebody one day. They told me that in the year of 1985, personnel hired 11,000 people, you know, and it's as much for people leaving as for expansion of the workforce.
What?
And I don't know that number to be correct, and I probably shouldn't even mention it, but it's, if we're going to talk about generalities, and I, you know, I can't verify that. I can only tell you, you know, whether it's true or not, I don't know, but this is what people perceive, or at least people have been told, and they perceive that. So if you're talking about why we are where we are, and why do people feel, and what are the labor relations at Eastern, and what is the employee relations at Eastern, then those things permeate the halls and permeate the telephones. And you know, they say, well, Jesus, you know, you got a group of 39,000 people, and you hired 11,000 last year. Well, that certainly, on surface, it fortifies everything they say. It doesn't speak well. You know, if you get a 30% change in your workforce in a year, it says something's drastically wrong, right?
It does seem that way, that's
Yes.
for sure.
And as I say, I couldn't verify those numbers, but I was told on the telephone. And whether it's right, wrong, or indifferent, I don't know. But that's what people perceive. And there's a lot of misperception. You know, there's a lot of total disbelief in the employee workforce, and the non-contract employee says, hey, you know, I talked to one of them in the hall, and they said, and they were right in the throes of everything, and they said, well, we hope the pilots do such and such, you know, at least they'll be speaking for us. We don't have anybody to speak for us. And they were looking to them to make things happen. Well, they had no way of making things happen. And the pilots were set in concrete as much as anybody. Maybe as much as Charlie Bryant, but maybe not. But anyway.
Well, when you talk about perceptions,
Yes.
and that being part of the problem, is there anything that could have been done about that in the period from deregulation on to help people to understand that better?
Well, you know, Jerry, maybe I'd approach it a little differently. You know, I think that maybe we talked about deregulation to the employees. We tried to tell them what can happen, what might happen, and we have to prepare that for the future. I think that if anything that we didn't do, we should have been more decisive in what we actually needed. We always played down what we actually needed. You know, let me give you, for instance, you know, we always said the VEP, we need 2%. And this is during the time that the Braniff was just about going down. The pilots, the Airline Pilots Association out of headquarters in Washington, made visitations around to different councils, including Eastern's. And they had a series of graphs on profit, on what airlines would need to stay in business. And they had done, I think, some good homework, and including, you know, J.J. O'Donnell, the then president of ALPA, came around to the councils and made part of this presentation, and stated in there, they had the graphs that says the 2% airline. They said, okay, initially, that may pull them out, but the graph went like this over a period of years.
Okay.
Says that wasn't sufficient.
Okay. Just fell off after a
Fell
while.
off after a period of time. Says wasn't sufficient in order the airline survive. Then they had a graph of 5%. A 5% airline, of course, it exponentially went up initially. And then it kind of leveled off, but it maintained itself as a profitable carrier. Then they had a 7% line. And of course, the 7% line just took off and went on up, straight up exponentially. You see. So they had the two scenarios, 2, 5, and a 7. They maintained that you're going to have to do 5. We would never face up to that. Now, you know, that might have been Frank's decision, or it may have been what finance was giving him. I don't think he would draw things like that out of the hat. He would have to make those judgments based on some good input. But they always, and there was a group of pilots who worked toward helping him VEP or profit sharing and and the stock deal in '75. Said 2% wasn't enough, and he used to maintain that 2% was enough. Yeah. Well, 2% proven that really 2% is not enough if you're going to be a surviving carrier. You know, because we certainly have been in that valley of death for a long, long time. Yes. You know, of trying to make the 2%. So the 5% number made a healthy airline. 7% made a tremendous airline, American Airlines type situation. But you know, if we had gone one time and gotten the right amount, then certainly we would not have set up the syndrome of you're just going to come back again, you're just going to come back again, you're just going to come back again. Why don't you get what you want, you need, and stop bothering us every time? Then we know what the hell to plan on, we know what kind of life we have to lead. You know, Eastern has had financial problems, I say, since the end of the 50s. The Electra on the scene instead of jets. You know, that was Captain Rickenbacker's decision, and a couple people in engineering. You know, damn good airplane, but an airplane that was an interim airplane that didn't need to be because everybody skipped it. Most people skipped it and went right into the jet. So as a consequence of that, we have been in the dire straits of money problems for 25 years. And one thing, you know, you learn a little from history is to at least recognize it. You don't have to copy it, but you can recognize it. Yes. And it tells you that you got financial problems, and you have to make major moves to get rid of those financial problems. And 1 year, you know, you don't make it. You know, it's a grain of sand that beach do make. But 1 year doesn't make it. You need more than one. And we weren't successful. We certainly couldn't swallow 80, 81, 82 recession. Just put us deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, and then that'd keep going back, and we had to change the names to an old program with a new twist to it. And they just got fed up with it. Just got fed up with it. They wouldn't believe anybody after that. You know, it's the same way, you know. You tell them that the sky is blue and it's always black, pretty soon they believe it's always black, regardless of what it might be. So
some of that resulted, too, in some kind of unhappy relations among the unions. Didn't it, where there was some feeling that the pilots had made their contribution and then the IAM hadn't, or that sort of thing?
Well, I was involved in that also, Jerry. Back in April of, let me try to get a month straight for you. Well, the last agreement the pilots had any increase was August '81 was the last time they had any kind of an increase. After that, you know, the pilots gave up as part of wage programs subsequent increases that occurred. And then I guess we had a weekend meeting in Atlanta with the labor people, Charlie Bryant and the pilots. I don't think the flight attendants were there. And said we were going to have a program, and Charlie had just signed his agreement in the early part of the year, and the pilots, as a result of that, agreed to a 17.5% wage holdback, and basically that that was wages that were to come into play. In other words, were under an agreement. They had an agreement in force, and then at certain specific times that they were supposed to get increases. Mm-hmm. Okay. They forfeited 2 increases that they were to get, and plus a 3.5% that made the total 17.5% that the pilots did not get. They didn't forfeit them, that they just didn't come into play at specific times that they were coming into play. And that put them at a flat salary from about August of '81. Charlie, as I said, had agreed to an agreement just prior to that. And in that April meeting up there, Frank had asked for a 5% program out of that, and then to forfeit any wage increases. As I say, the pilots bought that, and agreed to that 17.5%. And then Charlie, I was part of that committee to try to make that happen. And I went over to Charlie's office and I sat with him several days, hours after hours, of trying to get him to change. And he said, well, he couldn't. He just signed the agreement. No way he could. But what he would do, he'd try to make that 5% on a voluntary basis. And he said, in fact, I'll contribute my 5%. And so I said, Charlie, I said, voluntary basis won't do it. He says, well, I can't do anything else. I said, well, then how do I know that you're going to go out there and try to get that 5%? He says, well, he says, I'll tell you what. He says, I'll try to sell that program just as if I were running for president of the IAM. And he says, I'll make a tape, and we'll play that tape to all the IAM members. Well, he lived up to all that. He made that tape, and so forth and so on. And I think we ended up with 1.5%.
Of the people who?
1.5% of 5% of the salaries they wanted, they got 1.5% on a voluntary basis. I think that number's correct, Terry. It may be in there, but it's 1 or 1.5%. But the pilots were stung about this, you know, and they continued on, giving up their 17.5%. Charlie got his, and then came in the '83 era, is that Frank ended up giving the IAM 31.2, I think, and this just made that all worse. Mm-hmm. You know, this is the October '83 time frame I'm in now, okay, which Frank says, you know, if we don't get it, we're going to have to go bankrupt. Then he went to Washington and gave him 31%. The pilots just got more adamant about that, you know, and this led to a wide division of them. Then in '84, when the bill came on board, they were in a negotiation, and of course Charlie was coming at the table at that point in time and agreeing to do certain things, and to give increased productivity and so forth. And the pilot negotiating committee had agreed to Charlie on certain things to give productivity, but when they took it back to the MEC says, BS, you know, we've been giving our 17.5% for a long goddamn time. He hadn't given anything. You know, we want to see him up front first, and they turned down, and they replaced the negotiating committee. Hmm. Everybody holds the pilot's feet to the fire, said, you agreed to do that. The pilot says, we did not agree. Even though our negotiating committee may have agreed, we didn't agree to the MEC because you require MEC or membership ratification. And so they put a new committee in place in '84, and they subsequently came to an agreement with the company. But they would never agree to the 5% productivity, and the company and the IAM always maintained that the pilots weren't living up to their word, that they had that they had not given the 5% productivity that they had agreed to, and the chairman of the Eastern Pilots Negotiating Committee says, BS, I didn't agree to any stuff like that. Now, one thing that they don't address, neither the IAM nor did the company address, Terry, is during the time frame of this negotiation in the year of '83, we increased pilot productivity by almost 10%, from 47 block hours to a little over 50 block hours.
Oh.
In fact, I think the record would show that we got as high as 51 plus block hours on average out of the pilots. And that was through some things that they had done, a document that they had done, that we agreed to right up here in this ninth floor conference room. And so that was during the time that Charlie wasn't given a goddamn thing.
Oh, okay.
You see, during the same time frame, they were getting up 17.5%. They got up 17.5% and productivity.
Mm-hmm.
But nobody ever gave them credit for what they did in '83 as far as productivity. They wanted 5% above the level that they had done in '83, of which they had already given almost 8 to 10%.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody said, well, we don't care what the hell happened in '83. We're only talking about '84. We need 5%. So this more infuriated the pilots, and widened the breach to everybody, because Charlie was downplaying them on this side, and the company was downplaying them. And they said, hey, let the record look on what we did prior to '83. Well, nobody wanted to look at that. And it was again an era that it was a lot of finger pointing and just adding fuel to the fire. You know, now you got the raging flame going. And now, you know, and they, even though they agreed in '85, they weren't going to do a goddamn thing from then on.
Yeah.
From then on, it was nothing. And, you know, the whole year of '84, '85, they were in constant negotiations. Gibson probably told you that. They were always in negotiations, and then, you know, they didn't really get to real negotiations until the end of November of 1985, which then was too late. But, you know, we'd given them Section 6 in '84, and, you know, that thing ran the legal hassle back and forth about, we have the right to open the agreement. Here's the Section 6 opener. We're in accordance with that. We give you time. We give you notice that we're going to open it, and here's the letter. We're going to open it. And you know, the pilots went to court. The flight attendants went to court on the legalities of Section 6s and so forth and so on. And it was just a continuous upheaval, extreme upheaval. And just really led to solidifying positions by all people.
Mm.
And like Bill said, he got too deeply involved in the damn thing, but because he was in much of this stuff since October of '83 that led to all that, and he can be more eloquent in his discussion of it than I can. Because he's Johnny on the scene and participated a whole lot more. I did a lot of work on this thing because part of the problems with the pilots in the '84 negotiation is that you know, Frank back in October had told me to get the pilots in there and they got to do this or else, and so I told them that. Of course, you know, it just added fuel to the fire that they didn't think too highly of me, and so when they did come to the table, one of the things they said that you know, we don't like our current leader. So you know, I participated in some initial discussions, but after that I was persona non grata in those. But that was just with that one committee, because then in '84. Even though I didn't participate in the room, I was on the phone constantly with the ALPA negotiators, to the extent that many a night after they negotiated here, I was on talking to them until 4 and 5 o'clock in the morning, and then I'd come to work, for Christ's sake. Barrett. But you know, even the day that they agreed, and that when Alpa brought down Hank Duffy and John Bradley, and the then negotiator, chairman of the Eastern Pilot Negotiating, Bradley and I and the negotiator for the pilots met outside of this building over against that goddamn hedge, you know, and had discussions. Bill Usry knew all about it. Bill knew everything I was doing in the background. But it was noontime the day that they come to agreement that evening, when finally told him, you know, I told him, I said, Bob, John, I said, God damn it, you know, there is no more. Because that morning, Bill called me up and says, I wasn't even supposed to be in the company meetings because I got, turn that thing off a minute. It goes on, Jerry. But anyway, you know, because of a meeting that morning, and Bill Usry had invited me to, says, Tom, I want you to come to this thing. We met in the 9th floor conference room, and they had 2 plans of action to go to the pilots with. And, you know, one of them just wouldn't fly, and I made the statement that one wouldn't fly, and you're going to have to go to the other one, and which they did. And that's when I talked to the chairman of the ALPA negotiating and John Bradley of ALPA headquarters and say, look, you know, we made this decision this morning, and this is all there is. There is no more. And, you know, you may be able to stretch it around a little bit, but that's what you're going to have to live with. Mm-hmm. They both agreed and left me that day at noontime, came back up here, and subsequently completed the negotiation at 11:30 that night.
On the basis you had discussed?
Yes.
I mean, with those limits on it?
Yes, sir. Yeah. But through this entire period of 84, you know, while they were down here, I think I did more talking at night on the telephone than they did in the room discussing. But Bill was aware of all this, mm-hmm. because I would come in and frankly, and Bill encouraged me to do it, to keep that line of communication open, and which was eventually successful in completing that negotiation. But you know, again, that's just part of the intrigue that goes on. And you know, as with your labor background, is that more is done in the back room that's done across the table. At least everyone I've ever been in, Jerry, is that, you know, all of a sudden things are put across the table and everybody agrees to them. But a lot of the fighting, this is just all the drama scene up here, and everything else is done. Yeah, yeah, done over the bar, or done in the hotel room, or done on the telephone. Yeah. At night. But again, it's how much faith and trust the individual that you're bargaining with believes in you, mm-hmm. and what you're mm-hmm. saying, whether it's true or not. Because, you know, obviously one facet of labor relations is to try to hang on to get that last tidbit. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And, you know, it's like the good salesman knowing when to close and not to close on a deal like that. So anyway.
Do you have an impression about what the work was that Bill did in this? Because it sounded like you were working with him on some of it, on the behind-the-scenes stuff.
Oh, I think I was working with Bill behind the scenes. I don't think that I was that important of a cog, Jerry, and because Bill certainly, you know, was the lead man here, and I think that he was certainly, if not totally, substantially instrumental in pulling all these things together, and I think he was a strong catalyst, certainly in putting this thing together, and he has ability to bring both sides together that otherwise wouldn't happen. He certainly had the ability to hold Frank down You know, and I think as one of his major jobs was to keep Frank quiet long enough that they could get something put together. And you know, I have great admiration for him. I think that he's done a fine job, and I think probably Eastern would have gone to the demise back in '83 if he hadn't been here.
Mm-hmm.
You know, certainly I don't think the '84 agreements would have come out. We didn't then have anybody that that had the ability to pull these diverse groups together. You know, and as you heard Bill a little while ago, is that one of them's already hollering about reneging on the agreement. So
yeah, that's.
And it goes on and on and on. You know.
Yeah, it is. It's sort of an unending story. Right?
Oh, it's an unending story. You know, it's a. You know, if you had the time and effort to put a movie to it, you wouldn't believe it. Oh, that's certainly true. So anyway.
You mentioned earlier that you had spent some time dealing with the mechanics because of kind of filling in for somebody else. Can you talk a little bit about that group?
Yeah, well, you know, this is a critical time. This is July of '83, as I corrected myself, to end of April '84 when Joe Leonard came on. But Bill Huskins was in there as the Senior VP of Operations Services, and bless him, he's passed on now. He had cancer. And so in July, Frank asked me to run the operations services, go over there and take control of it while Bill Huskins was out. So went in there. And of course, what was happening then too was not only were they in negotiations and they had slowdown going on, but it was being exacerbated by laying off a lot of people. Bill Huskins was cutting the costs down, and of course they were reciprocating by working slower, complaining that they had no people, etc., etc. And parts were a major problem. We had more parts on the middle of the floor of the buildings than we had available to put on airplanes. And we were going hand to mouth day after day as far as maintaining airplanes and keeping airplanes fit for operation. But really started there, Jerry, trying to put some organization into the management ranks. It's kind of typical when they're leaderless that they finger point at each other, and that they were doing. You know, I was appalled at the disorganization of the group and the willingness to work together, because you know, 2 or 3 would gang up on another one, another 2 or 3 would gang up on another one, and it was just the animosity. And so
this is among employees?
This is among the management people. I'll start the management people first, because
okay.
To me, that's where a major part of the problem lay. They just didn't understand each other's position, each other's needs, each other's requirements, each other's difficulties as far as doing their job, and they really didn't work together. So I began a series of morning meetings with the staff, director levels, people, and so forth. And I made it a participative meeting. In other words, I would come down here to Frank's meeting in the morning, and then I'd go up there minimum 3 days a week. I would have a management meeting. We would start, and I'd go through the operation for the day, where we were, and so forth, and initially. And then I would go around the table to each individual. And they all wanted to pass. They all didn't want to talk, didn't want to say anything. And what I would do is I'd find a question to ask that individual that he had to answer.
Mm-hmm.
And the same way I'd go to another one, and he would say nothing. I said, oh no. I said, what do you mean nothing? There's all kind of things going on. What about this? And he would have to answer. So, this probably took better than a month or more. It took certainly July and August. And finally got them where they would talk. And they would lay their problems out on the table. They get to scream at each other a little bit, but I'd let them scream at each other and let it get off their chest. And I had one individual there that I could take, and I could use him as a little bit of a prod, because I'd want to surface something, and I'd surface it through him. And he's an old-time guy with a lot of experience, and he knew from what he spoke, without any doubt, and they knew that. And so I would surface a lot of these things through him. But the net result was to try to get them to talk, to understand, to put their own problems out on the table, let the other guy see it, and see what he's doing, how it affects somebody else. And if you're not planning correctly, look, this is what you're doing to me, and this is why you're doing it to me. Okay? So we got to the point where the management people kind of started to feel a little bit better about themselves. And then we start setting kind of goals that we were going to improve the open items, and we're going to drive that number down. And I'd have everybody report every day on how well they did on that.
Would you say open items?
They call open station items, and this is a list of items that the stations have requested to have on their shelves so they can repair airplanes. Okay. They were in fact sitting on a big pile or on shelves down here unrepaired, so they couldn't be at the stations. And so then we got we went through and had the inventory group set us up procedures how these things could. How we could track them better, and we had presentations by that group and so forth, and we, again, this is all communications allowing each other to churn and get it all out on the table so that, damn it, if you don't speak like in that thing with the inventory people, the inventory people say such and such, and these guys are snickering. I said, look, if you got a problem, if you don't believe him, here's the time to raise the goddamn question. Let's get it settled. Yeah. If somebody wouldn't in those meetings, I'd turn around and I'd say, hey, Joe, God damn it, we were talking about this, and you said you have this kind of problem with it. Do you or don't you? Here's the time to raise it. Then you'd get that goddamn communication. But we got that going with the management, and then I progressed from there to I'd start down on the floor of the hangars and of this building 20 right over here, the upper floor where that's the accessory shop. And that was one of our major areas, the small parts that go bad on an airplane. Fuel probes, engine pressure ratio gauges, and things that the day-to-day operation reliability on those things were less than desirable, so you had to keep a large stock. And so I started through that building, and I made some friends with the chief shop steward and one of the leads over there. And I did it in a kidding way. And I started with him and started joking with him and so forth. And, what the hell's going on here? And, why can't you get these parts out? And, God damn, it doesn't look like that. Here you are reading the paper and all this stuff. I did it in a kidding way, though, you see, so that I became fairly good on a communication level. I could talk with them, talk their language. I came out here some Sundays, and if I walked through the shop and I had a guy that was bitching, the next time I come back, I would go to him. You know, like one guy in the instrument shop, he couldn't get brushes to clean his goddamn gyros. And so I got him the brushes. And I said, later on I went to Frank, I said, hey Frank, you got your brushes? Oh yeah, we got the brushes, by God.
Okay, we're back on. You were just talking about the work you were doing with the mechanics group.
Yeah, with the mechanics group. But anyway, you know, just to repeat, to bring it up to speed, is that, you know, after the management group, and one of the things I didn't state about the management group, once I got them to the point that they were communicating with themselves and feeling better about themselves and working a little closer rather than individuals, I called a meeting down here in Miami of all the directors from the field and the top level person in each station. I had them bring their wives with them. We went to the Marriott downtown, and we had an all-day session down there. And again, this was an area where the guys out in the management out in the field have a time to get things off their chest. We brought in different people within the company. I even had Charlie Bryant there to make some comments. And we had a good all-day session. And then, in addition, in the afternoon, we had each guy, he was supposed to, given a certain amount of time, and he was supposed to discuss his station, how he saw it, what he needed, and what his goals were as far as performance was concerned. And that took us up through about 5:30 in the afternoon. And then we had a cocktail hour from 6:30 to 7:30, then a dinner that evening with the guys and their wives. And it was very well received. In fact, you know, they made the statement that, hey, we haven't had anything like this in a long time. We hope we have more of them. This certainly is a way to improve, you know, the communication, and it brought the family a little bit more into the problems that the husband was carrying home. That thing. So that went well. That really got us into, I think, that was well into the period beyond, trying to remember whether that was maybe as early as October, but maybe as much as February of '84. So, but anyway, to retrogress to with the mechanics, is I spent a lot of time in the shops. I spent a lot of time talking with whoever I could talk to. I made my presence known. I picked on certain individuals that in some cases I knew that they were problem children. And some of the shop stewards that were good shop stewards. Some that were pretty loud, and they had a following among some senior people, like in the building 17 here, and that was the instrument shop. And I just burned a lot of shoe leather out there. I picked some good stations and or shops, like the brake and tire, that had a major problem for a long time. They had tires all over the damn place out here, and they worked all those down, and where we didn't have tires and brakes, we suddenly, you know, they were there up to speed on everything. And every time I come by, I'd go in there and talk to Shorty and Paul. Shorty was the lead. He's the shop steward. And Paul was a lead, and congratulate them. And they got to the point where they, if they didn't have a brake or tire immediately that's required their attention, it got to the point where they were scrubbing the shop down. And they were very, very proud of themselves when they did that. And go back even a little further, another thing, the shops and everything were a mess. Jerry, they were dirty. Papers, trash cans were overflowing, not sufficient trash cans. And so I was in the aircraft service center one day, and I walked up to the shop steward, and he had about 8 or 10 guys around him. And they were talking. And I walked up to them, and I said, "What the hell are you guys doing?" "Oh, we're just talking about this goddamn shop. Look how dirty it is." And I said, "Well, hell, you guys live here. This is your shop." You know, he says, "Yeah, but," he says, "we can't keep it clean ourselves. Nobody will do anything for us. They won't provide this, they won't provide that." And the guy's name was Steve Rochelle, who was the union shop steward. And I said, "All right." I said, "You're making a lot of noise, Steve." I said, "I'll do my part, and I'll get it cleaned up. But when I do my part and get it cleaned up, I want you to keep it clean." "Okay, you do that, we'll do our part." So then this other guy that I was talking to you about, who was a director, and he's the older fellow, I named him onto a group and had him bring in different people from the shops, including the IAM, that we would establish house cleaning and that we would establish receptacles for trash larger than these goddamn paper bags that they had stashed around that wouldn't hold anything, and places just to put cigarette butts and things like that. So we had a group of them headed by Walt, the individual I'm talking about, and they would meet periodically on what they were going to do and how they were going to do it and how to get the shops cleaned up. This is all during the negotiation time and everything. And so their recommendation was that we put trash cans, big 50-gallon drums. So we got the paint shop to agree that they would paint them. That Walt knew a place to get them, so he had them delivered. They'd cut the tops out of them. They'd paint them. They even decided what color they wanted them. They decided that they would make them basically green, and that they would, because also they wanted to foster safety, they would paint the green safety sign, the white safety sign, you know, do it safely on the barrel, right? So we established the day that this all would begin, that these barrels would be put in place and that we would clean up. And that what we also decided was that we would take they get 5 minutes for cleanup, that we would take 5 additional minutes off of each shift for a period of a week, and that we would do house cleaning for that 5-minute period of time before they went to wash up. Mm-hmm. So that when the guy came to the following him on a shift, that he would have a clean work area. Mm. So it took a little while for all this to come about. But eventually I went again over the building 20, and I stopped into where they're doing the harnesses and things like that, and I commented to them about how nice the shop looked. You know, then I looked down this long corridor. The building's 300 or 400 feet long, and through the whole corridor you could see the green barrel, and they had the little red 5-gallon can filled with sand with a grate on top of it for cigarette butts. You could see that all the way up and all the way down the aisle. And then I would walk up and down the aisle, you know, and if I saw anybody that had trash laying by his desk or anything like that, I said, "Hey, look at that barrel right there." "Oh yeah, okay, we'll get it done, don't worry." You know. Later, the whole goddamn thing was spotless. Last time I went over there, I made a comment to this old shop steward that was giving me problems. He's now had a heart attack. And I said, "Boy, it sure looks nice over here, doesn't it?" Then I went to the chief steward, and I walked back into their little cubbyhole and said, "Hey, it sure the hell looks nice out there." And they smiled ear to ear, and it sure does, you know. And I did the same general thing through all the aircraft service center and everything, but just, you know, got them to feel better about what the hell they were doing. You know, And I start pressing on them, and it's Saturday, I'd hold down overtime. And I said, hey, you guys, you're not going to not work on the week to get Saturday overtime. So if you don't produce on the weekend, you're not going to get Saturday overtime. And they needed the money. They wanted the money. So then on Saturdays, when the first time I authorized Saturday overtime, particularly out in Building 20, I came out Saturday morning. So I stopped a couple of guys. What the hell are you doing? Well, that's what I'm doing. And then they'd tell me, he says, God damn it, you know, you want us to fix these goddamn parts? We don't have the inventory. We made an order before 3:30 yesterday so that we would have certain parts in here for this morning so we could get this work done for you. And by God, you don't have it done. So then I'd go to inventory people, you know. And then I had a employee committee on inventory. And they made a whole damn study, whole book they presented to me and everything else of their committee, and what was necessary to improve the distribution and inventory on the base. You know, I said, okay. I said, fine, I'll agree to all of it. But, you know, your feet's held to the fire. It's got to happen. You know, you're going to do it. Wally Distel headed that damn thing. He's now on the EI committee. But I gave them all, and then, you know, I kept them at their word. They said they would do something. Fine, I'll do it. You do yours. You know. And so each one I progressed through. And, you know, we went through that whole goddamn winter. And where I had the director of inventory tell me we were going to ground 50 airplanes in January. And I said 50 airplanes over my dead body we're going to ground. We didn't ground any airplanes. Didn't ground any airplanes. And so we went through that.
He was saying that because we were short of parts?
Yes. He's director of inventory. He's the manager of the whole management of the whole damn inventory system. Tell me we were going to not have parts and that we were going to ground airplanes. I said, over my dead body we're going to ground airplanes.
Jeez.
But, you know, Jerry, you know, I used to go wherever shop stewards were. There were 3 of them in their goddamn office in the Aircraft Service Center. At lunchtime, after I have lunch, I'd make a point, go up there and talk to them. You know, a couple things I did individually for them. One guy had a relation with a retarded child that he felt Eastern didn't handle correctly. So I went through the entire process on that. Took the time to go to the people in sales, contact the people at the station, and then have them get back directly with that guy. You know, and he never forgot it. Never forgot it. You know, even the vice president of the IAM here, you know, Russ McGarry. When I left here, he came up here and put his arms around me. He says, I don't know what the hell we're going to do without you around here. But nothing more than making them feel well. Number one is establishing the management communication among themselves. Let them understand what they need to do, that they need to work with each other, that their, you know, job performance of them is dependent as much about the guy who's beside him doing the work as it is themselves. They're not one-man shows, that they need to work together, this size organization, and they need to talk. They would not absolutely talk to each other when I went over there. It was, to me, it was just unbelievable to me. You know, and then, you know, after 6 weeks or so, I said, hey, you guys, I said, boy, you sure talk a little differently now, and then they'd all laugh.
Yeah.
But, you know, they needed the leadership. They needed leadership. They needed somebody to make them do, really to lead them through what they should do, you know. And these meetings became a catalyst. And they all came prepared after a while, because I used to take notes, right? And then, you know, I'd rattle back to them 2 or 3 meetings ago on what somebody said. You know, I said, hey, you said it was going to be ready this date. Where is it? Well, God, Dave, you got a good memory. I said, no, I got a little pad here, and I keep all the notes as we go along. You know,
Yeah.
just a little steno pad is what I used to carry with me all the time. But and we did. We had a good 8 months. I think that that those guys certainly improved. I went through that instrument shop the same way, like I said, getting the brushes for that, just those little hair brushes, to get the lint off of some of the bearings and the gimbals in those things, you know. And then just going back, there was a guy in the flight director shop. Nothing was ever right, and I spent a long time with that guy, talking to him right while he was working. But I listened to him, you know. And but then I would always go back, and I'd say, "Well, how's this today?" That was something that he had mentioned before.
Yeah.
You know. And hell, when I remember a time when that building 17 comes outside by the credit union there and for their breaks, and I'd walk by there for, you know, during their break, all wave like hell. You know, the guys in the small engine shop, in the APU shop, they always sat in that walkway right outside the credit union, and I always stopped to bits with them.
Yeah.
And when I'd come back from lunch with the cafeteria, they'd all be waiting there and just, you know, what the hell do you know today? What are we doing today? What do you think of this? You know. So anyway, it just takes that kind of hands-on stuff.
Yeah. It's effort, though. It's work.
That's right.
They happen automatically.
Yeah, but it was amazing, you know, and the morale picked up. We still had the complainers, you know. You don't kid yourself about that. But yet we drove the numbers down. You know, we didn't do it through magic. We just did it because they began to work with each other. They began to work with each other. But as much as part of management as it part of the rank and file on the floor. Rank and file on the floor can get no stronger than what management allows them to.
Yeah.
But they could see up there that those guys were discombobulated also.
Yeah.
They weren't talking to each other. You know, then they'd badmouth each other, and they'd all hear it.
Yeah.
You know, so we just got them to where they started to feel good about each other. Then the other thing that I started, and Joe really benefited of this, and this is where we have Randy Duke from that American Productivity Center. He and Dick Siegel. And, you know, we had one program with them, and I thought it was a good program that, and I had that set up to be done with the IAM directors, the maintenance directors, managers down there. And fortunately, Joe came on board the day or so before those meetings were, and frankly, I just stepped back out of it to let Joe in on that thing. And Joe subsequently told me, he said that you know, that saved a year. That 3 or 4 day period of time with Randy Duke, and I'm sure you know what that's
Yes,
all about. Yeah. And
Joe Leonard was just coming into maintenance
yes,
at that
he
point.
just come in. That's the end of April 1984, and I had those things scheduled well in advance. You know, 2 or 3 months in advance, and for that to take place, because again, it was part of the management communications. An improvement that was necessary, at least in my mind. And that was a good session, and I think because I asked the participants in it, they were skeptical as hell because it's the way they were over there, but they eventually, to a man, said, "Hey, that was a good deal. That was a good deal. I tried to get it through the rest of the corporation. In fact, I tried like hell to get it for the officers. You know, and I got to say also that Randy Duke and Dick Siegel were asking me because they, in their own feeling of what they had seen, and because they had done some before with mixed matched groups and so forth, and one of the officers well before EI ever started, they said that they thought it was extremely important for the officers to do this thing. I got it set up, and then it was canceled. And, you know, in fact, I called little hell about saying I was getting too much involved in that crap. You know, but yet it was still their opinion. And because, you know, well, why do we need it among the officers? We talk. The officers of this company didn't talk to each other any more than the management down there did.
Yeah, it's very easy for each one to get sort of in their own groove.
Yeah.
Regardless of what level they're at.
That's right. You don't interfere with me. You know,
Yeah.
What are you getting into my bailiwick for? You know, that's a waste of time. Where the comments should get. That's a waste of time. What do we need to do that for? You know, but hey, it was important as far as I was concerned. And you know, any one of those things that if we'd have went ahead, we always found that we were too busy to do some normal things, some things that would improve us as individuals, as working relationships. Nobody would ever buy the fact that we didn't work well together. You know, and hell, all you had to do was watch the Miami Herald. You could see the fight going on between two very prominent people.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
So, and that wasn't, and everybody around the corporation knew it. But yet we didn't need that kind of camaraderie to develop. We had it all. But, you know, that's all water over the dam, obviously, on the thing. But there were a lot of things. The IAM's in the same trouble today as they were back in '83. The whole shop is.
It is?
Yeah,
Yeah.
What I see. It's, in fact, I drove up through there today, and the same things you see up there now: garbage, parts, wagon loads of aluminum laying around, parked this way, parked that way, part of it laying on a concrete, you know. And they're the same way. You got airplanes parked without engines now. They're out trying to lease engines.
Boy, that's unfortunate. That's really,
You know.
that's
And
unfortunate.
it just adds to the cost.
Yeah. Oh, it certainly does.
Sure, it just adds to the cost, and we're going through the same goddamn thing, and you know, making things work is just like a goddamn negotiation process. You inch ahead.
Yep.
You know.
You got to work at it all the time.
That's
Keep
right.
it-
You
keep
go
it-
take one fell swoop, and I'm gonna lay off 400 guys or 800 guys. You know, if 30 airplanes disappeared off the scene and you laid off 800 people, it's a different story. What's going to remain, everything else, is that you got to gradually change that goddamn thing. And then when you do change it that way, it'll stay. But fell swoops, big broom. You know, I've seen too many managements come through this place in my 36.5 years. Each of them come through with the same broom, you know, painted a different color. And if you looked at one, there's this one versus that one, what they were going to do. The names changed a little bit, but the everything else, it was just, you know, it was just pull different blind over it and raise this one. They all, and it's everybody, you know, and rightfully I understand that everybody's got their own thing they're going to do. But it's kind of, you know, it's not too many things invented in this life, particularly in the area of management.
Yeah.
You know, doesn't say that you'd be the dictatorial type of John L. Lewis or some of those other guys, but yes, you do progressive, yes, you do participative, you know, yes, you listen, but, you know, rash decisions get rash results. On the thing.
Mm-hmm.
But you got to first enlist the support of the people, and you have to get them to understand themselves and the other person, and you have to be able to get them to communicate what their problems are between each of them take part of the other guy's problem and try to help him solve it, because they're all integral.
Mm-hmm.
They all work together on that thing, and don't get anywhere working as rugged individualists.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
You know.
That's true.
So, but you learn that over a long. One thing labor negotiations does is says that it forces you to listen.
Mm-hmm.
It forces you to try to improve a little bit as you go, inch along.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and make it. We got here by inching back. You know, if we want to improve, we're not going to do it overnight. You know, we're not going to take it all one fell swoop.
Yeah.
But we need to set a goal, and what that goal should be. And it shouldn't be a nebulous goal like we want to make a profit. You know, it has to be definitive, and there has to be a plan to get there. You know, and it has to be a rightful plan. But you know, the plan need not be an axe. It need only be a paring knife, as long as you continue to keep it going.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, you get them there, and they accept that. You move them on, they accept that. Move them on, and accept that. You know, but the plan needs to be developed, and then know where the hell you're going. That everybody understands where the hell you're going, and that they all can work toward it. You'll never get that camaraderie of working together if everyone doesn't know, and that's all you do in the communication process. Jerry down there was get everybody to know everybody else's problems.
Mm-hmm.
Then you can solve them.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't have a plan, you don't know the plan. You know, there's many a time we ask plans, what's the 5-year plan around here? Oh, we have a 5-year plan. Where is it?
Haven't looked at it for a while.
In the hip pocket.
Yeah.
You know, so it's great. You know, we're glad somebody knows a 5-year plan. We wonder what it is. You know, never made any impression when we asked that question.
Well, this
So
has been
anyway.
good, Tom. I really appreciate your coming over and visiting with me this long.
Well, probably talk too much for you too, because
No, that's fine.
I may have been boring you a little bit.
No, I found it very interesting. You've had a long period of experience here in a whole variety of different jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because most people who've been a pilot deal with the pilots, and you've had more flexibility.
I've been through most. Been through a lot.
Well, we'll get this transcribed and get you a chance to look at it, and then we might want to talk again if it'd be okay with you.
All right.
Okay. Thanks.
Good enough. Thank you.